Hello again. This is Nina McCutcheon from London, Ontario. I'm going to tell you a story. I grew up with a mother that never wanted me to know the truth about who my real father was. And at age 12, I was born again through a wonderful lady named Lynn, who passed away very tragically by the hand of my grandfather, who was a very abusive man. When I was a little girl, I grew up without a real father and a mother that never wanted me. And she said many, many times, Nina, if I ever lay my hands on you, I'll kill you. My mother had some issues that she's never ever dealt with, even today. She turned away from Jesus Christ, she said. When she was a young girl, she used to serve him. And because of something tragic that happened in her life, she turned away from God completely. That tragic thing would be something to do with my father, I believe. And so throughout my years, I searched and searched and hoped and hoped and prayed and cried out to God, hoping that someday I would meet him and know who my earthly dad was. Many people say to me today and before today that, it's not important who my father is, that he's just a mere man, and that God is the most important thing in my life, that Jesus is my father. And that's true. I believe that. Jesus is the most important person in my life, and I love him more than anything. And I don't like to cry, but I'll tell you something. It is important that we know our real fathers here on earth. God gave them to us for a reason, and it is important for us to know and be with our families, and for our families to know Jesus Christ. And as children, as we grow up, it affects our lives, but it affects everyone around us as well. And when I was a little girl, I used to cry out in the middle of the night, and my mother confirmed this and said that I always cried out with dreams all the time. And even today, I go to sleep at night, and sometimes my heart pumps so fast that I jump out of bed crying, Jesus! Daddy! And as a young child, I did the same thing. Daddy! Well, obviously, there's meaning to that in my life, and God doesn't want me to forget it. So throughout my journey as a young girl and growing up and being on the streets, I searched and searched for the answers. I even went to the extent of looking into hospital records that finally were confirmed that I don't have a birth record, that they destroyed them. Later, as I got involved with my grandmother that was, very old, I used to go and talk to her about Jesus. She was a Jehovah's Witness, and later I found out that she was in the hospital, and I had no way to get to her. I was overweight at the time and on medication. But I said, to the Lord, because the Lord spoke to me and He told me about her going to pass away. And He says, I want you to go see your grandma, Nina. I said, but I don't have a way to get there. And this was when the Arcade Street Mission in London was open. And Tom Reed, the founder of Arcade, was alive. A very wonderful man. He was like a father to me, in fact. And a wonderful lady called Brenda took over, and I was very, drawn to her as well. I needed those figures in my life, but I still needed to know the truth about who my real father is. And so that day, God prepared a way for me to get to the hospital, and I went in and I spent time with my grandmother. I combed her hair white as snow, and I talked to her about Jesus, and she could hardly talk at the time, just say yes with her head. She was very weak, but she was very glad to see me. And the most amazing thing is that my family wasn't there, and God made sure that no one interrupted us. Because most times in my life I'd try to do God's work, and my family's right there to interfere. And why do I think that's an awful thing? Because they're always involved in causing harm. I love my family very, very much, don't get me wrong. And I hope the best for them. I want them to turn to Jesus. I pray for them a lot, you know. But I just, you know, I can't make the decisions for them. Anyways, as I tell my testimony, me and my grandmother talked. I combed her hair and I spent time with her. And the Lord wanted me to ask her if she would receive Jesus into her heart. And so I did. And my grandma received Jesus that day. And as I was to leave the hospital, Jesus spoke to me. And he said, Nina, this evening your grandmother will die. And she'll be with me. Instead of crying and being sad, I was rejoicing. I was happy and very, very pleased to know that I did what God told me to do. And my grandma was saved. And I miss her very, very much. But I'm glad that I took the time to spend with her and that God used me. And so later I went back to where my aunt was taking care of her down on Queens Ave in the house, in the back of a house. And I go by there lots of times. That house is still there. And we went through the photo album. And out of the photo album appeared a black and white picture of a baby with lots of hair, a little spark in her eye, chubby cheeks. Looked like a little native baby, in fact. And I stopped my aunt and I said, "Hey, Aunt Jean," another relative that's passed on. "Who is that?" She turned back and she said, "Let me see that." She says, "I believe that's you." I said, "What?" "Everybody told me that I never had a baby picture taken, Aunt Jean." She says, "Oh, yes, you did." I said, "Can I have that?" She says, "Sure, why not?" I held that picture close to me, very, very close to me, in fact, and I didn't want to let it go. It was my identity. Another answer that God was giving me, because it is important for Him that I know the truth about my Father. And so He was answering my prayer that day through my grandmother's death and salvation. And so I went on my way, and later on my journey with the Lord, I heard Him speak to me again, and because I was involved with this man in the States called Prophet Peter Popoff, the Lord told me to send my baby picture to him. And I said, what? Why? I didn't want to let go of that picture. I want you to send it to him. So I sent it to him in obedience to God, and that picture never returned again. I'm sure that he has that picture held close to him. And I stand today in my own personal time with Jesus, and I pray that that truth will be evident someday. Is this man my father? Could be. God knows the truth. Do I look like him? Many people say I do. And I'm just like him, in fact. And another thing, I'm more like Jesus every day. And it doesn't matter. You might have proof that he's a fraud. I don't. And even if he is, he's my earthly father. And I love him very, very much. And God's not going to allow that to go away. And he wants us to know the truth about our parents. And he wants us to be able to reflect on that, because our relationship with our fathers and our mothers and our families reflects on how our relationship is with God. And so God desires that we grow closer to him and know him as our Father and rely on him for our needs. And through our parents, he does that. And he wants us to know the truth. And so whether he's my father or not, people, it doesn't matter. Whether he's a fraud or he isn't, God desires that I know. And so you can't criticize that, and you can't sit there and say it's not true. I have more proof in my life and in my heart and what God's done in order to make that evidence. You don't. And I've done the work in order to find out whether it's true. And why hasn't it been, reported or told? Well, that's between him and God. You need to ask Jesus about that one. You, nations, you need to find out for yourself. Do the work. Ask God what it's all about. And find the truth. In Jesus' name.